Hey, deserving listeners, this is part 2 in my reaction videos to Adolescence, the TV miniseries. Let's get back to it.
The other bloke is much more easy.
Okay.
Him checking whether to stand was much easier.
They need
Whether
to
I understand
understand
what I did. No, fuck off! I didn't fucking say that! You fucking putting words in my mouth! It's like a fucking trap in here!
Jamie!
We're seeing another display of him being aggressive and angry and upset. And he is, I think, reacting, at least the writers are writing it in a way that is indicating that when he's frustrated, when he feels ashamed, when he feels backed into a corner, when he feels like things are getting deeper and more vulnerable for him, he gets big and angry and defensive and feels like he has to counteract that vulnerability with the display of toxic masculine aggression. And maybe now's a good time for me to just talk briefly about toxic masculinity, as I have said before many, many times on this channel and my podcast, that masculinity has a lot of pros and cons, as does femininity. And we tend to only hear about toxic masculinity, but we can say that there's good and also neutral aspects of masculinity. Also, there are elements of toxic masculinity that can be positive or neutral. For example, the propensity towards aggression. Under this circumstance, it's not helpful and is self-destructive and may be destructive to other people, right? We can certainly imagine. And what he's being accused of is aggression, murder, right? We don't know exactly why. I wonder if we'll ever exactly figure that out. But obviously, aggression has its toxic elements and can be manifest in destructive and harmful and criminal ways, immoral ways. But aggression in general can be neutral or it can be positive. If someone were to attack my wife physically, then I would engage in my masculine aggression and feelings of responsibility, for better or for worse, honestly, for myself, to defend my wife, right? I would consider that my manly duty. Now, whenever I get into this, people will say, oh, so women can't defend people physically as well? And I would say, no, anyone can do it. It's the key here is that I, as a man, as a boy when I was young, I was programmed by millions of vectors about what it was to be a boy, what it was to be a man. And it involves a lot of aspects and values and understandings, most of which are just a story that we tell about what it is to be a man and a boy. It's not biologically determined that we have X, Y, and Z traits as a boy or a man, but through society and culture and family and interactions with all the above, we cobble together, each of us, what we think masculinity involves, what it means to be a proper man, what it means to be a proper boy when you're a boy. And a part of masculinity that is extremely destructive is that if you step outside, in most communities, in most societies that I'm aware of in my neck of the woods, if you step outside of that very strict mandate to be very properly masculine, maybe hyper-masculine, then you are instantly, you're not on a gradient. It's like a either or. You're either a proper man or you're not a man and you're worthless and you're weak and you're a woman and you're gay and you're feminine and you're soft and you're emotional and you're worthless. And this isn't men on men. This is all of society, regardless of gender, participate in that notion. You know, you will hear women will even say that they don't want a weak man. They don't want to marry a guy who is emotional or who is scared of spiders and this sort of thing. I'm not talking about all women, but there are. So I'm saying, and there certainly are some men who are okay with being afraid of spiders or okay with their masculine friends being afraid of spiders. So I understand that there's a lot of case by case, but there's a lot of scholarship and also a lot of anecdotal experiences and a lot of reflection and frankly a lot of therapy that I've been through along these lines, so I can speak from that place. So when we talk about masculinity, it's very important that we delineate between positive, neutral, and toxic masculinity, because in the public discourse, if we only talk about toxic masculinity, it is being heard by people that all of masculinity is toxic. And every time I bring up positive masculine aspects, I always get pushback from people saying, how dare you claim that that aspect of masculinity is okay? It's not okay. And I'll say, well, what do you think is a positive aspect of masculinity? And, we can talk about whether we should dismantle the whole thing or whether it's possible or blah, blah, blah. But there's just a lot of different thoughts and a lot of values, a lot of experience, a lot of culture. But in my opinion, in terms of where we are at right now in society, 1,000 years from now, I'm just going to take a guess and say that if Seattle exists in that future, that the ideas of gender will be quite different. Hopefully they are, honestly, for the better. But for right now, with a lot of people, including myself, that have been programmed this way, there are various different ways of approaching it. I can try to dismantle the whole thing, which is an option, which I have done a great deal of. I even did a lot of that before I even became a therapist. I noticed things about myself when I was a teen that I don't know how I would have framed it, but I was pushing back against expectations about me as a male, as a masculine person, as a boy, as a young man. I didn't like being pigeonholed. I didn't like those being forced on me. And so I would push back on those things. And perhaps part of it was that there wasn't much question in at least my circle as to the aspects of my masculinity. I was captain of the wrestling team. I was captain of the football team. I, had a lot of accolades, so to speak, of masculinity, certain badges that made it so that I could toy around with the edges of my masculinity and not have people come at me and accuse me of being feminine. What I was getting at is that it's black and white often with boys, that you're either a proper man or you're not. And if you're not, then you are worthless as a human being. And when I learned this, I can't remember where exactly I learned it. It might have been from this documentary called The Mask We Live In. I think it's what it's called. Wonderful documentary. I've actually prescribed it to clients of mine who have all universally come back, men, and said, oh my God, what a powerful documentary about masculinity. And it involves talking with men about masculinity and, a lot of leaders and thinkers and regular people. Anyway, so when I learned that once that toggle switch has been made, that you are not a proper man, then you are worthless in all domains. You're worthless as a romantic partner, as a sexual partner, as a friend, as a son, as a brother, as a father, as a coworker, as a boss. I don't know, just across the board. You're worthless. Completely worthless. And this is told to young men, to boys. Not in all situations, not in all societies. Are there pockets, are there individuals that don't have that aspect? I don't know. Like one of the scenarios where it comes into sharp focus is that, I'll just self-disclose, that if I'm in public or even online and someone insults me specifically around my masculinity, they call me a pussy or a girl, or they call me a Sally, or they call me a cuck, or there's certain words. Mangina was one of the things. Whenever I would speak out against red pill and incel and all that stuff, I would always get all those names in my comment section. And I'll tell you, there were times when people would say those things to me, and my insecurity about masculinity, given that toggle switch being threatened, right? And it's so weird how someone can threaten to toggle that switch from a comment on the internet, right? That's how fragile masculinity is, that at any moment, you can work your whole life to be masculine in all of its ways. You're a good earner, and you're an honorable person, and you're strong, and you're helpful, and you know when to throw a fist and when not to, and you drink beer, and you work out, and you have facial hair, and your wife says that you're good in bed, and you have abs, and you just all this stuff. But just one word will just tear it all down. And this is not an indictment on men. This is a fucking indictment on our society. I can tell you that my masculinity is strangely fragile, to the point where if someone, when they did that in my comment section, it's just like, okay, obviously this is probably a 13-year-old calling me a mangina because I'm talking in a nuanced way about masculinity and incel culture and red pill culture. And I would, at times, as a professional and as a content provider, I would reply to that person and say, I'll give you my address. You come over to my house and I'll show you who's a mangina. I did stuff like that. What is that? What? Why? What would that prove? What kind of danger are you putting yourself in? Even if it happened and I did show him who's a mangina and beat him, what kind of legal and societal trouble? And like, I'm not like that, but I am like that apparently. And I have been through tons of therapy, and I have done a lot of thinking about this, and I lecture about this. I've read the research. I've read philosophical papers. I've been around the block. And me personally, I'm, just not super interested in upholding that notion of being, decidedly masculine by everyone. Intellectually, I don't give a shit. And yet, calling me a mangina online, boom, it'll trigger that. So that's what toxic masculinity is. What a positive aspect of masculinity that I can grab onto is perhaps to be strong, right? Strong can be a negative thing in terms of like suppressing one's emotions, right? Or needing to be stronger than women. But you can also be strong and adhere. I can't, this is just me, but for me to adhere to the aspect of masculinity that I choose to adhere to in certain contexts is to be strong, honorable, and measured and smart, or making good choices, being above it, right? One could say that it's a version of masculinity, perhaps positive masculinity, to be insulted in that way, to be called a pussy or a cuck or a mangina, and for me to be like, doesn't threaten me, I'm okay with that, and I'm not going to stoop to the level. Now, people will say, so women can't be that way? Femininity doesn't involve that? No, I'm not saying anything about femininity. We can talk about that. There's really no debate because it's just a matter of opinion and your own personal experiences. So I'm just speaking from my personal experience that when it comes to wanting, because, I can't get away from, that's the part about masculinity, at least in my neck of the woods, that we can't get away from, is that it would be nice if I could just discard the whole thing and just say, I'm just a human being. But I can't. In the same way that I can't just completely discard the English language. When I think of an apple, I think of the word apple. When I see a window, I think of the word window. When I talk, the syntax and the grammar and the accent, it's in my bones. And masculinity is also in my bones. I learned it the same way. I learned languages just through osmosis. I just observed and absorbed everything throughout my life. So I've got to deal with it somehow, and the way that I deal with it is to delineate in that way, so I can identify the positive aspects and hold on to that, because there's a part of me that needs to feel at least somewhat masculine. And how do I make decisions, and how do I investigate that, while also not oppressing women, right? By not claiming or believing that women can't be strong, or they can't be honorable, or what else did I say? They can't be above it, right? Certainly women can. So it's not a contrast, it's not a comparison, it's just a surrendering, if you will, to my programming, while also being moral and ethical and constructive. Does that make sense? I'm guessing I'm going to get a lot of comments on that, which is fine, but let's all be cool to each other, including me.
What was that? Hey? What the fuck was that? Signal away like a fucking queen, yeah?
Okay, so I think what the storytellers are telling us is that in his moment of vulnerability and the walls are starting to come down, he initially resorts to the aggression, pushing away, but then to go even deeper into his soul or into his mind, then we see this, which is new. We haven't seen this specific persona before, which is, for lack of a better term, like the Andrew Tate in him and the incel in him, the red pill, the manosphere in him, when he looks at her and says, yeah, just like all the other women, acting like a queen, acting like you own the world, acting like you're the victim when you're not really, because that's if you don't know, that's the whole foundation of the incel, MGTOW, red pill, pickup artist, manosphere, Andrew Tate world. It's just a ridiculousness of notions, and the boys and men are being brainwashed, literally. The pathway is that you have boys and men who are hurting in a variety of ways. They're dealing with identity, they're dealing with hurt, they're dealing with anxiety, self-esteem, depression, motivation issues, you name it, just a lot of pain. And they have been programmed by society, depending on the society, to not ask for help, to not be vulnerable, and to believe that if they are not the proper Chad in life, they're not the proper man, which is a very narrow set of attributes which no one really possesses. If they don't have those things, then not only are they not a man, a proper man, but they're worthless in general as a human being in all domains, as I was talking about before. So there's a lot of distress there, and they look to society or to their programming how to get themselves out of it, of which many of the notions that they have are not helpful. To let it go, to bury it, to get aggressive, to drink, to drug, to smoke weed, to play video games, hang out with friends, or whatever. These things are not helping. And they don't know where to turn. And if they even possibly ask a question, which wouldn't happen normally, but if they do, they ask a teacher or a parent or a friend or a therapist, a lot of times it will be awkward in terms of the conversation, or the adult that they're talking to has toxic elements of masculinity themselves and will not be a good source of healing or help in that situation. So where else do they turn? Where they go online. And so if they go into the general internet, again, people will not have nuanced, helpful ways of responding to them. But there is a group of people, the red pill, manosphere, incel, MGTOW, pickup artists, Andrew Tate people, they do have an open door and they do feel comfortable to these individuals. Because in the beginning that they speak to them, they'll say, are you suffering? Do you find that the answers of society are insufficient? Do you feel blamed? Do you feel like you're being targeted? Are you frustrated? Are you having a hard time meeting girls? All that stuff. And they will respond to that. Of any age, by the way. You could be 55 and fall into this world. That happens. And initially, it's this oasis. And I can understand why someone would turn to that. And then that's when the brainwashing starts to begin. It's not necessarily purposeful. It's sort of mutually reinforcing. It's not like there's someone at the top pulling the strings. You could say maybe Andrew Tate, but there have been figures way before Andrew Tate that were doing this as well. But in my systemic view, I think it's just a manifestation of toxic masculinity. So once you cross that line into that world, then the notions of masculinity start to be the solution about we need to be strong, women are the other, they're the enemy, they're stupid, they're wrong, we're right. We need to be firm. We need to be men, manly men. We need to assert our dominance. We need to assert our place in the world. We need to assert our superiority. And here are all the reasons that justify that. And there's all the 80-20 thing and the red pill thing and the feminist is the problem. So this represents that he is representing having been programmed. This is not just natural societal toxic masculinity. This is having crossed that line into that cult. And I don't use that word lightly. People use that word pretty freely. I say cult because it has a lot of the elements of a cult in that the members within that group, you really depend on each other because it's your one oasis. And if you raise your hand and say, I don't know if we should be going that far, you will be immediately excommunicated. So you brainwash yourself, and it keeps everyone in line, and it's mutually reinforcing, right? There's not necessarily a leader at the top that's pulling all the strings. It's in-group, out-group stuff. It's all that. And it starts to brainwash you into believing that women are evil, literally, that feminism is the problem, that women are out to get you. They're manipulating it. One of the things that they will talk about is that, everyone will say that women are victims or they're weak, but the truth is that they know exactly what they're doing. I mean, just look at all of us, how much we clamor for their attention, for the beautiful, sexy women and girls. They have all the power. What's this claim that men have all the power? So those pretty women have all the power. They can walk into a room and get a job and get someone to give them free drinks and get a guy to drive them wherever they want and get a guy to buy her jewelry and cars, and pretty women become famous for no reason, like Kim Kardashian or something. You hear all this stuff, and if you're 13 or uneducated or you have motivated reasoning or you're in pain, it sounds believable. It's believable enough anyway, and it feels very satisfying because it explains something. They're lost. They don't know their way out of the pain. They feel rejected. They feel like there's no way out. And this attitude of superiority and male superiority slots into all that they've been absorbing in society, that men are superior. So the problem also resides in the fact that among people that understand this idea, the things that I'm saying right now, when boys and men step forward with this mindset, they are often slammed down and judged and said, incel, and you're a creep or something like that. And certainly if they're being creepy or harmful, defend yourself and label people, I suppose. But where do these people turn? Among non-incel, non-red, where do they go? Who do they talk to? Who knows enough nuance and is loving and accepting enough to hear them while also not brainwashing them and also leading them, having a role model to follow that is not Andrew Tate, that is not all those others. I won't name all the names, but you know them. Where do they go? In my view, the choices are very limited. They're out there, but they're limited.
Hey. Are you going now? Are you going? Would you like me to? It's not to me, is it? If you want me to go, Jamie, I can go.
So I will say that the depiction of the clinical psychologist is very much appreciated by me, since the vast, vast majority of depictions are poor, are inaccurate, are exploitative, are harmful, meaning that if you were never in therapy and you watched depictions on TV and movies, you would think that therapists were narcissistic and exploitative of their clients and unprofessional, whereas she is being very accurate to the role. Now, do psychologists and therapists act in unethical, immoral, problematic ways? Sure, but it's extremely rare. It's much more common that you'll see something like this, especially with what role she is given. The fact that she is given this important role of a forensic psychologist who goes into the detention center and has the responsibility to write a report that's submitted to the court. And she doesn't seemingly have a supervisor that is directly dictating what she does, means that she's been through a lot of training. She has a lot of experience. She knows what she's doing, not only just in the conducting of the assessment, but also how to handle people that she is working with who are acting in this way. And she is, at least the way it's being written and acted and directed, I very much appreciate that. She is not getting rattled. She's not making a joke about it. She's not getting violent with him. She's not running out of the room. She certainly could leave if she wanted to. And we saw that happen. She came back and she was firm and strong and stood on her own 2 feet. She didn't fall apart, right? Now, if she did fall apart, it's okay. It happens sometimes, but it's important that as clinicians, we have professionalism. And I'll see people online talking about situations like this. And sometimes, not all the time, let's say maybe about half the time, I will see conversations like if she were to go onto a public forum and say like, I had this 13-year-old boy who like yelled at me and kicked the chair across the room. There'd be a lot of people that would say your employer is exploiting you. That's a massive problem. And, maybe. But if we can't sit with these people, then who can, right? Now, she should protect herself. There's no reason to do anything that's at risk to her. But, if he's going to say insulting things, if he's going to exhibit his psychology, and we're just like completely flabbergasted by that, then that doesn't help. We need to have an expectation that if we're going to ask questions, if we're going to be in that venue, if we're going to be given that mantle of mental health worker, then we have to accept that we're going to see some stuff. The analogous profession that I think about is if ER doc were to be squeamish around blood, you would wonder why they got into this business. Certainly it's okay for someone to be squeamish around blood, but why did you become a physician and why did you want to specialize in the emergency room work when you're that, and why haven't you worked on it? Now, if what I'm saying is that if an ER doctor said, "Oh my God, like there's so much blood everywhere, and I don't understand like why it's that way. I mean, I keep telling my boss to stop doing this to me." That's what is happening when you have a mental health worker, a therapist, a psychologist who's like, "Oh my God, I have all these clients and all these people that I'm conducting an assessment on, and they're annoying in the following ways." It's like, well, what did you think was going to happen? Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying stop complaining. If I went through something like this, I would probably have a lot to complain about, to vent or download about with a colleague or a supervisor or something. I'm not saying that you can't have feelings or that you can't vent or you can't complain, but to have it be unexpected and to rail against it as if this is not what you signed up for is, I think, a problem. Not only for you as a professional, because if you don't accept that this is going to happen, then it'll come out of the blue and it'll hit you, it'll broadside you. But also it's harmful to the people that you're working with. If you can't accept that these things are going to happen sometimes and you don't develop a plan or some kind of approach or get consultation or training or something, then how much good are you going to be with clients that are like this? All right, well, let's adjourn there for now. Tune in next time when I continue watching the show and reacting. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.